chart. This is just a graphic drawing of what we symbolize as the beast of Revelation 13 with the woman riding it. And we know there's a horn in here, which it isn't portrayed in this particular drawing. We had it in another, but it's entirely too large to put up here with all of this. Over here we have the week of Daniel. Now, we've got prophecies in the Bible that pertain to the second advent of Christ. And there's people today projecting things about the coming of Christ, the Antichrist, the beast, and all of this. I've listened to a few of these guys just to get their thought on Trinity broadcast. I don't belittle their ability to know history as far as history, because I know they've spent much time in history that I have never indulged in. So I will catch their little pictures and projections of history. But it's a sad picture when they begin to try to take what they know intellectually and put together a picture. Just for instance, brothers and sisters, if we're reading Daniel 7 about when he saw the 10 horns come up, and the little horn that came up and magnified itself, you never hear them talk about that little horn was the power of the papacy through the Dark Ages. They're afraid to say so on the radio. In the back of their mind, they may have a little idea that that could be true. But now, if I look back and you look back through history, there's only one system in the world today that has outlived the emperors of Rome and the imperial systems of all these horns of Europe. Your present governments of Europe today are no longer the structure of your old monarchies. The papal church has outlived all of it. Amen. It's come through the imperial system, the feudal system, into the era of monarchs, kings, right on into the age of what we call so-called 20th century democracy, and there she still is. Now we realize that horn in Daniel 7. He saw that it had eyes like unto a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Then you come over in the latter verses of the 7th chapter, when the angel explained to Daniel about the fourth beast and the little horn. It spoke there, and you can read it for yourself, how that little horn would speak great swelling words and words against the Most High. He would seek to change times, laws, and seasons. That's not yet in the future. We are living today out on the end of what the papal church system did through many years of putting together a Western calendar. You know it. And I want to say this. Before the advent of Christ, there was no such thing as universal historians. The only historians you had were men of certain nations. They wrote history as it was related to the beginning of their empire. Rome had a beginning approximately 800 years before Christ. The Julian calendar didn't even go back that far. But when we come into the time that this little horn of Daniel 7 was to begin to fulfill what it says in Daniel 7, then's when the Catholic Church is in control. The Western world is living under the reckoning of time, the Julian calendar. But it's the Catholic Church, not the government of Rome any longer, setting the standard or the authenticacy of keeping of time. It's the Catholic Church. And that's why, brothers and sisters, as the Catholic Church under the power of the papacy through the ages, it did not happen at one time. all of this is a gradual growing process. As the power of the papacy grew more in supremacy, and they take more and more control of both the state as well as the spiritual side of humanity, this then brings about an opportunity for everything to be channeled through the hierarchy, the authenticity of the papal's authority. If somebody brought a suggestion, it has to meet approval by the Vatican. No wonder in 1492, years before Columbus ever came to the New World, he had a problem trying to get some European government to sponsor his trip because they thought he was crazy. And don't think, brothers and sisters, he didn't have problems with the Vatican and the hierarchy of Europe. So that's why we have to see Daniel 7, that horn. He had eyes like a man and a mouth speaking great things. Sure, we read about the power of the Pope and the blasphemous titles he's held through the ages. The Vicar of Christ. I got a history where popes in a certain period of time, from along about 1000 A.D., popes begin to get this idea. He is the sovereign ruler, both of men's souls and bodies. And brothers and sisters, that's blasphemy. The old Caesars used to claim that. That's why he was called emperor. As far as I know now, there's only been 2 areas of geography that's been ruled by men called emperor. That's Japan and old Rome. Emperor, the word means sovereign, universal ruler. So with that, when the hour gradually came, the popes of Rome came into preeminence through the Dark Ages then, on into the 15th century, at the beginning of the Reformation. There was no king, potentate, governor, magistrate, or anything could rise and project his position above the power of the papacy. History declares it. By the time we come to the 15th century, the things that little horn has done, he's established a record of timekeeping as far as the Western world. It all starts out after the advent of Christ. The Christian world was observing time, and they would say it like this: in the 53rd year of our Lord. They no longer referred back to the founding of their empire. They were looking at time from the beginning. God did something new. And that's why they choose the first day of the week. Now, if we've got any Adventists in here, I will not argue with you. You're caught up on a kick, and you've been that way for several decades. But this thing that the Jewish Sabbath is the only thing that Christians should observe is absolutely a perversion of interpretation of the Scriptures. The writing of the Ananiasian fathers, Barnabas, plainly tells you they saw by the types in Leviticus to be observed, and those things that was projected up to the birth of Christ in the first advent. When Christ rose on the first day of the week, which was not called by the Jews Sunday, they saw that this is the beginning of a new creation. And keep in mind, Pentecost, the Holy Ghost fell on the first day of the week. So they used the first day of the week not to make a dogma, but because it's a revelation that the things that have been typed in the Old Testament under the law constitutes a new day. And that's why, brothers and sisters, Christ is the beginning of the creation of God. That's the creation that we see in regeneration. And it'll not be over until the millennium is over and the earth has been regenerated and renewed into the plan of God. So with these things in mind now, let's go to Daniel 11. We know as we read in Revelations 13 that this Roman beast, as it rides with the church and the Pope, that little horn, which is the papal power, comes right on through time to the 15th century. We pick it up then in Revelations 13, which is not a picture of it as it had existed in past tense, but it's a picture of it coming up in its last day, 20th century fulfillment. Therefore, that's why we see it in its entirety makeup in Revelations 13. So as we go along, brothers and sisters, I would like to explain to you, don't keep this picture here, just way back here, but try to move it along as we look through these various passages of Scripture going towards the week of Daniel. Because right here at the week of Daniel is where this system really shines. But it must have its restoration and put in that state to progress through this time where the man of sin really fulfills his role. In Daniel 11, we're reading about the last pope that'll ever be. Now notice, he's not called at that time a pope. He's referred to as a king. People read it, well, I just don't understand, Brother Jackson. You will. In Daniel 9:26, he's referred to as a future prince. Jesus spoke of him as a son of perdition. In Daniel 7, he's spoken of as a horn. Well, how in the world can he be all that? You've got to understand the symbols, what they portray as to how Satan exercises his objective through that man. So with that, our other three messages goes back and brings the history up to time. But this puts this man of sin into the week. As we look at the Vatican today, we see a pope, which to me, he is a model of what we would call, no doubt, the best pious type of a religious man. He far exceeds many of the popes of the Dark Ages, who are nothing but downright ornery rascals. History writes about it. This pope seems to have a different view. But don't let that fool you. Because we're not looking at the man, we're looking at his office. And we're looking what that office is permitted to do when that week of Daniel comes. That's where it all culminates. Now, as that time approaches, I would like for you to keep in mind the world today is in search for a means to bring about some kind of stability on the earth. But Jesus says in Matthew 24, in this period of time, there will be distress of nations. You cannot deny the fact we've got it. Amen. What do you think that is in Somalia? And brothers and sisters, I'm not saying this to speak against a black person or anything. But if you go back in the histories of those ancient people over there, they cooked one another. And when Bush sent our troops in to be humanitarians, little does the Western educated world realize you're not dealing with educated people who govern themselves and make their decision based on modern, up-to-date leadership. They had no less than about 5 warlords, 2 major and 3 minor. If you'd go right over there and get right down and investigate, it goes right back to those old tribal differences. Amen. Now let's bring it across the Mediterranean into Bosnia. That's not black people fussing. Again, that's mixture of races. Long as communism held them in the clutches, you never heard a word out of them. But the minute they're given up freedom, they're at one another's throat, aren't they not? Amen. Now keep in mind, What UN has done nothing. All they've tried to do is actually entice them with food and aid. You don't solve a problem like that. If they don't want to solve that Somalia thing, go over there, pick up them 5 warlords and all their cutthroats. The first thing. Oh, but we can't do that. Then forget about being humanitarian, because you're going to wind up the loser. And now that major rascal is making a fool out of us. And right down here in the Caribbean, you got another situation going to do the same thing because they're looking at that. This creates distress from the little to the larger. When you look over there in Yugoslavia, that's exactly where early Christianity, which was established by Apostle Paul, Macedonia, was the Christian center of that area and remained that way until the Muslim spirit centuries later began to move in and take over. Then when this breakup of the Russian perimeter comes, you've got that age-old antagonistic, it's a Catholic-oriented Orthodox society turning against that Muslim, and they call it ethnic. It's not ethnic, it's religious. It's religious. UN can send all the aid with soldiers standing on the sidelines while the Croats and all the rest of them play with them like a cat with a mouse. So I don't want nobody to talk to me about New World Order. It's not a New World Order, it's an old world order with a new suit of clothes on. That's the way the Bible describes it. It's going to stay that way. If UN for 50 years hasn't accomplished anything, what do you think another bunch like them would do? It's already evident. Nations who are members and have been members for 50 years, when it reaches a certain point of decision, they drop out. They're absent. They won't vote. And they won't participate. That's why in the Bosnia situation, and think of the thousands of people that suffer the consequences. But I venture to say, if the heads of state of Europe today was to go to the Vatican and say, now, Pope, we stand ready to carry out any suggestions. If you've got an answer to solve this Bosnia problem, my opinion, there would be a little something done, but the Catholic Church would wind up the victor. Now we start here. The week of time has come. But as we look at the week of time, I want us to look at time itself as it's related to you and me. And we see the earth's major sign, Israel, the fig tree. She gets her birth back here in 1948. These are all verses of prophecy related to a certain period of time as the nation is brought back gradually, restored to statehood, and intervals of time she passes through and she gains certain advantages or possessions of territory. I've explained it like this. You cannot take these prophecies, write them on pieces of paper, throw them in a hat, and shake them up and reach in and pick. Oh, yeah, that can be right now. It don't go together that way. Each one of these prophecies are related to a time factor. In 48, a nation was born. You can read that in Isaiah 66, verses 8 through 12. Has the earth heard such a thing, that a nation should be born in a day's time? We come right on down. Then in 1967, what happened? Israel had a 6-day war. Little did the world realize, Israel took the territories that constitute. He said in that day he would make Judah like the horse in the battle. And look what Judah did. When she took the Gaza Strip, you read in Zephaniah chapter 2, God said he would give the old land of the Philistines to the tribe of Judah in her restoration era, and those ancient strongholds that were Philistines would be places where Israelis would have their dwelling. And the agricultural picture states right there also, it would be a place for herds of sheep. The Arabs have been there for 2,000 years. God's prophecy is not talking about the Arab sheep. He's talking about when the Jew has sheep there. But because they've made this little peace thing, people are wondering, is prophecy going backwards? No, no. Keep in mind, that whole thing has been brought about by Western influence. In every sense, the founding of the state, Israel's rulers, more or less, have always tried to, we will say, rely on Western influence because they don't want to be found guilty of going too far within their growth. So we can see then, since 67, Israel has been in the Gaza Strip, and she took the whole west bank of Jericho to the Jordan River. Now all of a sudden, to have peace, the modern, we will say, political mind want peace at any cost. And we've got that even also in the church world. They don't care how close we are to the time of the Antichrist. What we need is world peace right now. I don't want to see war anymore, they'll say. But let's watch now. When they took that Gaza Strip and the old city Jerusalem, that fulfilled exactly what's worded in Luke. When Jesus was saying to the disciples, in that day, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, till the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. In June 1967, when the Jewish soldiers drove the Jordanian legion out back over the Jordan into their own country, and they tore down the Jordanian flag and up on the Star of David, then the soldiers stood there with their rifles and weeping. Never again will Jerusalem be brought under control of another foreign power. Think of it. After 2,500 years almost, now Jerusalem is a free city, still populated, we will say, roughly 3/4 Arab. Now, I'm not speaking against Arab people any more than I am Gentile people, like over in Boston and such places. But we've got to look at time and conditions through the eyes of prophecy. And God's going to have his way, irregardless, brothers and sisters, whether it pleases me or you, from our racial, sentimental feelings about things. And I'll say this. While man's pitting man against each other, when this thing's all over, God's going to have some people living in the millennium. And brother, they will know how to respect each person for what they are, for what God has made them. Because he's going to be the governor then, and the bride of Christ is going to rule and reign with him. And I'll have to say, all debts are going to be canceled. Nobody come up and say, hey, you owe me this or that. Well, anyway, now let's really look at this time factor. When we see Zechariah 12 and verses 2 through 9 there, in front of us, there comes a time when the city of Jerusalem becomes a focal point. And God says, and in that day I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to all them round about. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but it's just in front of us. Amen. Well, how far away, Brother Jackson? It might be sooner than you think. Because when I look at this peace thing, upstairs is the Jerusalem Post. One of Arafat's big key men comes on and makes a bold statement, it's in print. This present peace pact has a termination point of 2 years. That within the 2 years, all Jews in areas that they've signed in this interim agreement, that Jews will get out of Jericho territory and the Gaza territory. The same man says, Jerusalem must also be brought into this. And therefore, all Jews leave. That is a must. But then when I look, brothers and sisters, in Isaiah and so forth, yeah, Isaiah 49 goes right with this chapter. You put them together. Because Isaiah 49 shows you that when in God's hour of time, Jerusalem proper is his focal point, and we're fast approaching the week. We're getting close to it. When he said he'll make Jerusalem a cup of trembling, then a burdensome stone to all of them that become involved. That's your international diplomatic side of the picture. So the point is, how close are we? I have no doubt. Within this interim area, you've got Arabs now in the old Jerusalem city saying, we want the same promise of independency, self-government. They're going to demand it. These things, brothers and sisters, cannot go on, and I have to believe it's not going to run 2 years. It's just like an explosion. And when these Arabs begin to try to force Israel to bend, to give in to their oncoming statehood, then you do have prophecy going in reverse. And I don't see God letting his people Israel, after he has brought them back through these last 50 years, give them statehood. I don't see God letting that be. I see God letting certain things happen so that he can actually begin to show his power. Now think of Israel trying to be submissive, cooperative, and yet on both sides you've got an antagonistic spirit. Jews say, never will we leave these settlements where we've labored. And yet the Arab says, you've got to get out. Now something's got to give. The point is, who's going to do the giving? Politicians can say a lot of things, but when you bring it down to the street level, there's where the problem lies. So as Jerusalem begins then to be the focal point, then notice what Zechariah 12 says. In that day of time, and say, let's just say if that's 2 years off, young people, when I see Jerusalem the focal point, and I see in these areas where the Arab thinks he's going to get statehood, I suddenly see God reverse this whole process. And instead of Israel giving up, Israel getting out, I see a condition rising in the Middle East that we're going to see prophecy after prophecy fall in place. And when it does, Numbers 24 comes to my mind. We're getting very close to the week. We have to separate here to give you a picture to look at. When Numbers 24, read it. In that day when old Balaam told Balak, come here, I'll show you what these people will do to your people in the last days. Latter days. It hasn't been yet. And he told them that whole land of Edom and Moab and all of that, how Israel would sweep over it and conquer it. Isaiah 11, Zephaniah chapter 2 has another prophecy. Jeremiah and Ezekiel all prophesied what Israel would do to the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites in the latter days. So when we look at Numbers 24, and Balaam told Balak that these people will do valiantly when they're doing that, that means God is going to be on their side. Now how can we look at that? Well, we go back to Micah 7. And God promises through Micah the prophet, chapter 7, in that day, as I was with him when I brought him out of Egypt. You read in Exodus the miracle, the miraculous display of God's power. Take, for instance, when the spies went into Jericho, and Rahab the harlot took them in, and they asked a few questions. Rahab told them, when we heard that when you all crossed the Red Sea, when we heard the story of what happened, She said, our hearts did melt within us. We got afraid. And now, there they are just across the Jordan, waiting to come over. Well, if that's the way God worked then, what in the world do you think He's going to do in this day? When the whole Western world's so educated. We don't need God. But go back to Micah 7. Line it up with Numbers 24. And these are the verses that pertain to Moab, Edom, and the Ammonites in Isaiah 11. Don't string them out. Put them all in the same one. That's why I say, looking through windows of prophecy here. But my sermon today, message is the approaching hour of deception. And we're in it. So when Numbers goes in motion, Micah 7 drops down to anointed. And I will show unto him great and marvelous things. Read it. Insomuch that the heathen, that's not that old black bushman out of Africa, nor that bunch of natives in the South Sea Islands. That's this bunch of long-haired, educated professors of this Western world who's got everything scientifically figured out. My foot. God's let them go this route to get in the position they are. And it says, the heathen will come creeping out of their hole, crawling out of their holes, with their hands over their mouth. Startled, amazed, over what? When they see the God of Israel on the scene. Because the hour has come, God's going to display His power before the world. And you read it. It'll plainly tell you. And don't minimize it. You magnify it. Because if God could show Himself in the 6-day war and do some outstanding things which the Western world today don't want to believe, and I'll never forget one of them. It brings tears to my eyes every time I think of it. This pilot, he's done made his circle. He's dropped his bomb. He's coming back through the Sinai Strafen. He took a shell. Half of his wing is blown away. He's losing altitude. He radios to base. I'm going to have to ditch. All of a sudden he turns and he looks. And he sees a little fellow sitting out there on the end of the wing. Go on. Go on. To the world, this is nonsense. Unbelievable. And he looked again. And he never spoke it. He just motioned, go on. Finally, the pilot radios base again. He says, you may not believe it, but I got a passenger. They bring out the newsmen, photographers. That passenger stayed on that wing until he landed the airstrip. Amen. But when he taxied into position, he didn't have a passenger any longer. He didn't need him. Oh, I tell you, brothers and sisters, this world is just getting ready to be shook by the power of God. No, it's not going to create a revival. But there's some natural people out here in this world. God wants their attention. Because He's going to use them as time approaches that week. Now let's move towards that. Because as we read about this last pope, we get a picture. It don't look like a pope. That little baby kissing, baptizing, pious fellow. But I want you to know, the whole entire Western world is locked in the clutches of a spell. They all know, somehow or other, that if they're successful in reaching any kind of a peace agreement on their behalf, why do they all go trotting by the Pope? Tell me why they go trotting by the Pope. What's he got to do with this? And why did the state of Israel just send a chief rabbi over to the Vatican to talk to the Pope, John Paul II, here just a few weeks back? And the Pope told him, as he was invited, promised him, I'll come. And it won't be long. In my opinion, brothers and sisters, whatever this present Pope, in his view, in his vision, has done, working behind the scenes in international religious diplomacy, helping to build a platform for the future hour of this. In all probability, this man will not be on the scene. But if this man is taken, keep in mind, he has established an office of recognition. He's built a platform within his estate that's recognizable, and it's a position of authority. And he carries a vision in it that the world of that hour, as we approach that time, the world will be compelled then to look at this man. That's why the Apostle Paul comes on in 2 Thessalonians, whose coming is after. Paul wasn't talking about the popes of the Middle Ages. No. He's talking about the one whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power, satanic power, and signs. Yes, satanic signs. All of a sudden, you never heard the like of Catholics. Not in the old world, but in the new world. The Virgin Mary is appearing. She's bringing messages. She's telling the world of pending judgment. Well, she's not telling us something new. It's already in the Bible. But I want you to know the Catholic Church has not interpreted the Bible properly. So they've deceived the world. Now keep in mind, this present Pope, it's a Hail Mary. He loves her. He devotes his prayers to her. He set that standard. But as I look about this man in the 11th chapter here, that Pope, I see a different personality because the time has come for it to be that way. Nevertheless, as we approach the week, that Pope, whoever he is, whether it's this one or the next one, you cannot help but realize he is going to have to sit in the Vatican and watch these scriptures, how they begin to be fulfilled. If God says the heathen will come crawling out of their holes, startled at the display of his power, then don't tell me the Pope's going to sit in Rome and look at it and jump up and down and say, oh, praise the Lord. Because God's not doing it to make the Pope happy. He's doing it to make the Jews wake up and realize, I'm with you. Now the fact that that man has to sit there and watch how God turns her loose and she'll make a sweep across Jordan. And I'll have to say, if anybody ever puts old sad man Hussein to sleep, Israel will. She will no doubt do in a few hours what it would take a bunch of Gentile politicians, even if God was on their side, weeks to do. And keep in mind, brothers and sisters, God's power in that hour is going to be so evident. No, it's not going to create a revival. That's not the purpose. But God's going to open up the eyes of some Gentiles. Because as we get closer to that week, when these Jews have got to renovate that old city and start building their temple to fulfill these passages of scriptures in here, I want you to know God has not only displayed his power on the military battlefields and the world, somewhere in the world, people are awakened. Then we see the man of sin. Now in the West, we move this beast system on through here. And we're approaching that hour. Naturally, Israel, politicians in that hour will sign this peace agreement. Whatever that covenant consists of, Israel will sign it. And brothers and sisters, there he sits in Rome. Pious, religious leader, and the old church system riding high in Europe. But now watch. Let's begin reading. Verse 38. This is where I quit off the other night. But in his estate, that means in his office, his position, shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, and with precious stones and pleasant things. Now the question can be asked, as I hear from some of these Trinitarian preachers, they want to interpret this, well, the Antichrist has got to be Assyrian. Because, see, this prophecy is projected from Assyrian background. Antiochus Epiphanes. Yes. You don't look at that man. You look at the spirit that used that man to do a certain thing. It's the spirit of it. So there's a setting. Keep in mind, if this is that baby-kissing, pious Pope, Hail Mary, then why is it? But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not. What has happened to this man? Something's got to happen. Because God's word don't lie. Amen. So now move with me. Here he is, that last one, approaching that week, and it's signed. We know exactly, according to Revelations chapter 11, 2 Jewish prophets come on the scene. Right? Yes. Does the world today know where they come from? No. But the Jews, when they appear, they'll know shortly. Now, when you read in Revelation 11, and keep in mind now, you'll watch the Pope in Rome. And here's these two men in Jerusalem, dressed in sackcloth, prophesying in the streets of Jerusalem. And the power of God begins to vindicate those men. We begin to see a social unrest, instability situation setting up in Israel. As Jews believe them, there's others that become antagonistic, driven away. You've got to see the picture like that. That's why these men are definitely going to be backed up with the power of God to smite the earth with various plagues and curses. And keep in mind, that's not universal curses. It's definitely got to be in the Middle East, where the nation of Israel is the focal point. Now imagine you, and I'll say this, brothers and sisters, I'm not here to tell you when the rapture is to take place, around the beginning or anything. But I have to believe, brothers and sisters, the true church is going to see the beginning of these men. Now, why do you say that, Brother Jackson? You tore my thought all to pieces. No, I didn't. I'm just trying to find a hole in your mind where you can see reality. Here's a Gentile for you. They look at this week. They know exactly how long it lasts. Well, they think the world's just going on haphazardly. All of a sudden, one day, the man of sin comes out the back door. I got an idea. Good. Let's all sign a peace covenant. Bingo. 2 prophets come on the scene. Just like that. Is that the way you picture it? For goodness sakes, don't do it like that. Everything that has ever been in the first advent has a small fragment of an overlapping period. There's no such thing. There is a uniform consistency of the application. That's why Paul says in Thessalonians concerning the coming of the Lord, that day shall not come except there come first the falling away and the man of sin. That's why we're reading from the 2nd chapter, 2 Thessalonians. That lets me know, brothers and sisters, as we really do come close to the time factor, when that really is the time that God deals specifically to fulfill the Scriptures, I have to say, not 40 years in advance, not even 3 years in advance, but out of that period is the shadow, a reflection of the conditions that begin to develop that carries everything into that time factor. And therefore, brothers and sisters, I can see these 2 men, anointed of God just like Moses was and Elijah was. They called for a drought. They changed water to blood. that smites the earth with all kind. I can see lice, I can see frogs, I can see crops failing, I can see a total breakdown of the agriculture, of the whole economical industry. And the Pope sitting over in Rome every evening looking through his TV tube, CBS, BBC, and all of these national medias with their cameras are going. Don't tell me that the Pope of that hour, who has just already seen Numbers 24, and those passages of Scripture fulfilled when Israel went gallantly out there, now he sees two men over there, and a revival's going on. I want to ask you a question. Put yourself in the Pope's chair. And you've been praying, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary. And you've made the world believe in that stuff. But now through that TV tube, you're seeing two characters over there in Jerusalem, in that state of Israel, which now has already been shown that God's with her. And as the Pope watches that, don't tell me he can watch that power of God strike like that and not begin to realize, I can't cope with it. Yet when he has to sit there and look at 3 years and a half of that, do you think he's going to change his views? No. But I'll have to say, what God has done militarily with Israel and now spiritually with these prophets is going to drain out of him everything that's made him the pious, Hail Mary Pope that they've been in the past. If you can't see that, brothers and sisters, I'll have to say you're blind. Because no human being is going to be able to sit. Keep in mind, he can't do one earthly thing until the time comes. But as the time comes then, that we're getting closer to that week of time, something's got to cause that man to begin to feel like, I've got to bring an end to this thing. It's ruining my plans. Now you go to Revelation 17, which speaks about the beast in that hour of time. It'll plainly tell you there in the 17th chapter. And the beast that was, Papal Rome back here, and is not. That's through the period of the Reformation. And yet it is. Shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. That's the spirit of Satan. And his end is perdition, destruction. That's why you should understand then why Jesus called Judas the son of destruction, perdition. It means one ordained to lead something to destruction. All Judas was just a normal Jew, but he got to a certain place, he just could not understand certain things. And instead of humbling himself, he began to try to outfigure. It only got him into a problem. But when he was anointed with that Spirit, while he was under that spell, he had no longer feelings to reverence that man. He thought it justifiable to go betray him for 30 pieces of silver. The devil made him do it. He gave him a plan. That's what the devil's going to do with that Pope when he reaches that hour of time. Something's got to make him jealous. It's going to take the Hail Marys away from him. And I'll have to say, God ain't going to even allow the devil to bring on Mary anymore. Oh, no. She's done had her time. So now then, as that spirit comes up and gets on that man, his vision change, his outlook change, his motive change. He's going to become completely a modern 20th century deceiver. He'll be a political, scientific genius. He's going to be one of the most smartest, intelligent type, we will say, world leaders, because that's all he's got his gaze fixed on. And the devil that anoints him, brothers and sisters, keep in mind, he will have the very type of a man whose mentality, his whole makeup, just fits the picture. So, this thing has got to be brought to the end. So as we continue on. Verse 39, thus shall he do in the most strongholds. That means he begins to make plans with high men of political status. Stronghold don't mean he's got a certain bunker he goes to and does his meditation. You got to realize a stronghold means somewhere there's great political influence, and he's going to use it. With a strange God, yes, it's the God of materialism. Now you take that to Revelation 13. What does it say about when that seventh head is healed? That there was a mouth given to him. It's that same mouth that was in the heart of Daniel. After now it's been healed. And once that mouth is restored and healed, now he'll begin to speak. And as he speaks, now then, brothers and sisters, there's nothing about him changing time, laws, and seasons, but now he begins to speak blasphemies against the God of heaven and them that dwell in heaven. This lets me know he no longer even believes in the same God of the system that he was a part of. Something's changed in the picture. It's a God of materialism. And that's exactly what our whole Western world is actually under. Even our doctors, in all their scientific learning, the more they make to try to discover new diseases and a cure, the more they brag what they're able to achieve. But they don't want God in the picture. It's the God of humanism, human success. But you've got to keep in mind, if they did not have material things through which they exercised their humanistic ideas, they'd be utterly helpless. The medical world has lost a compassionate doctor who you could call in the middle of the night, my wife is sick, my husband's sick, and get up and harness his horse and hook up to a buggy, put an old lantern at his feet, drive 5 miles in the night, come in and sit the rest of the day with the sick in the home. I grant you we live in the 20th century, but God always was. So with this, in the most strongholds, he plans a strategy. He shall acknowledge and increase with glory. Now, keep in mind, once this man is anointed, you've got to realize, back here in the first part, while those men are prophesying, nobody can touch those prophets. So the Pope's going to sit in Rome. They don't need him getting up off his chair yet. He's going to sit in Rome. Twiddle his fingers, get nervous, get mad, all frustrated. And I believe the madder he gets, the more hostile he feels, he loses thought about Mary. Because that exposed the whole rotten thing. You've got to realize that, brothers and sisters. See, the Gentile church world hadn't seen that kind of display. So you've got to realize, and brothers and sisters, we was building this building in 1967. I'll never forget Brother Mayfield used to bring his radio here. Every day we kept up to date. About every hour they broke in and let us know the success. And I'll never forget when they came on suddenly one day and said, the war is ceased. Israel is the victor. Heads of state, military men of Britain and the United States, all politically, publicly made the statement, it had to be an act of God. Now, if God gets that out of just the way he led Israel in 6 days, then don't tell me, as we're going towards that period of time, we're going to pass through all these prophecies as they're applied. God sets the stage to accomplish 2 things. To set the evil where it's supposed to be, and to accomplish and set the good where it's supposed to be. All of this works within that prophecy, that in the last days He will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything. It will be shook. So you've got to realize all these things have got to drop in order. So we're in the week, and something causes this man then. And at the time of the end, we're now in the week, shall the king of the south push at him. Who is this king of the south? Historians, it's Egypt. Well, why do you say that? That's the language back in the earlier verses of the 11th chapter. The king of the south was Egypt. The king of the north was Syria. That's the relationship in the ancient conflicts that went on around Israel in ancient times, the south and the north. Now there's got to be a reason why this is worded like this. What's Egypt got done in the picture? If you have been listening to what I've been saying and catching the picture, you should begin to realize when God magnifies himself and turns Israel loose, and God does cause Israel to do exploits, when that period is all over, you know what that puts the Middle East? The old Islamic religion is dead. I don't believe that, Brother Jackson. Stick around. Zephaniah 2 is a further wording of the prophecy. And in that day, meaning when God is accomplishing this for Israel, God says he will vanquish all the gods of the earth. Now, don't put that in the millennium. You put it back here where it's necessary. Now, why do you say that, Brother Jackson? All because, brothers and sisters, as we approach the week, and we know Israel's going to be building a temple here. Revelations 11. John saw it. He was told, go measure it. They're going to have animal sacrifice, so they've got an altar. All right, now watch. When you go to Isaiah 60, that's why we put it right here against this. You've got two pictures in there. There's a temple being built, and you've got the city of Jerusalem being renovated and restored to beautification, getting it ready for the millennium. Now look at the picture. In Isaiah 60, it plainly tells you that out of Saudi Arabia, and it names the area Sheba in those regions, God will cover Mount Zion with camels out of the deserts, and they will bring gold, incense to be offered on his altar. I challenge anybody today, tell me, could you get that out of Saudi Arabia now? As long as they're under that Islamic spell? No, sir. Then out of southern Jordan, where it speaks again in Isaiah 60, rams, sheep from Nebaioth. That's one of the sons of Abraham by Keturah. See, he sent them off into the east country. So keep in mind, God's got his eye on Saudi Arabia. He got his eye on all those Jordanian people, them Bedouin people of the desert. Now we go, brothers and sisters, to Haggai chapter 2. When God spoke of the temple in the end time. He told those people back then when they was building the little house, God says the gold and the silver is mine. God knows exactly where it's all at. It's known that Saudi Arabia is the richest Arab nation in the Middle East. So I see right in front of us, as God wraps these things up and drops these things in place, as he gets Israel ready to go into that week of time, yes, they're going to build a temple. There's Jews there today. Their heart is throbbing, waiting for the opportunity to build it. But that political bunch is standing in the way. They're ready to sign anything just to appease the Western world. But God's going to get tired of that, and he's going to rip these things all to pieces, and he's going to turn Israel loose. And it's not going to be wars struck out, brothers and sisters, that last for months on end. It's going to be wars and conflicts just like it was in ancient time. A few days and brother, it's all over. Israel has got the victory. That's what's absolutely going to cause the Western world to set back, shocked. How come they did it? I can see, brothers and sisters, Saudi Arabia, the old ancient Moabites, the Edomites, they're all descendants of Abraham, the Ammonites. Now, when God does that, don't tell me Egypt's going to hold on to Islamicism any longer. And don't tell me that Syria's going to hold on to it any longer. Because keep in mind, Abraham was a Syrian. You read it in Genesis. He was a special man that God wanted to start this particular race. And you read in Isaiah also that in that day God promises there will be a covenant. He will establish a covenant between Egypt and Syria. And there will be a highway out of Egypt going through Israel to Syria. And that's going to be a perpetual covenant, brothers and sisters, that lasts straight on in the millennium. So this gives me a picture, brother, that this side of that total week, God begins to set things in motion. So it's this man of sin coming from Europe, across the Mediterranean. He's coming into the Middle East. Egypt is not in sympathy with him. Neither is Syria in sympathy with him. Because Egypt and Syria has been watching what's going on in Jerusalem. They cannot help but see when Israel went on across Jordan and wiped up the picture. When it says in Zephaniah, he will vanquish the gods, he's meaning the religions. And this whole Middle East conflict is a conflict between religions. Judaism and Islam. And I don't say this to show any disrespect toward an Arab person. You can spit at me, curse me, but I'll say, you stick around. Elohim of Israel is going to make you stop saying Allah and say, we will worship Yahweh with you. You don't believe me, I know. Stick around. Because these prophecies are going to drop down in place and it's going to shake this Western educated scientific world. And I'll be glad when it does. Maybe we'll get a bunch of these long-haired gays disturbed and shook up when they can see there is a God and they begin to examine themselves. All right, let's move on quickly. At the time of the end shall the king of the south, Egypt, push at him. Yes, this Antichrist. Because I have to say, what do they see? They hear disturbance coming out of Rome. They can see activity and movement. He's beginning to make plans to make a move to stop what's going on in Israel. The whole Middle East has been watching this. And the Western world on the news too. I can say this, brothers and sisters. You can think whatever you want to about a TV. If you think it's a curse, throw it away. If you know how to use it, then use it for a benefit. Amen. Because God knew when he said it there in Revelations 11, that when that rascal does cross and comes in Jerusalem, the first thing he does, he has to bring an end to that. Kill those two prophets. He couldn't do it until God allows it. So when he kills those two prophets, he boasts. I can see his chest stuck out. He's not coming along with a log chain. Hey, I'll marry this now. He is a tyrant, possessed of the devil. He's thrown off the robe of the papal hierarchy. He speaks like no other devil has ever spoke. He characterizes every type that's ever been exemplified in any other character before him. It's all dumped in him. Now he's going to show the world who's God. This is exactly where Paul got his revelation. When Paul said how he will set himself up in the temple of God, showing himself to the world. He is God and demanding the whole world to worship him. Imagine how he will look. The fact that he can go over there He's seen this demonstrated, how other men tried to get rid of him. Didn't work. And when God will turn him loose, I can see him. I'll show the world what I can do. Not with his Hail Marys, but with his God of materialism, scientific, modern weaponry of Europe. Revelation 13, and the whole world will say, who's able to make war with him. There's a reason for that to be worded like that. There's a reason for him to say, who's able. Europe's got the same military high-tech technology we had in the Gulf War. That was only trying it out. That was just a little display of what they'll have. And I can see when he succeeds in bringing them to an end, that stops the revival. Now in his heart, he's got an aim. I'll destroy and wipe from the face of this earth the existence of this bunch of people, and I'll show the world who's God. Yes, I can see him bring the sacrifice to an end. Begins to deprive the Jews of their liberties and things. But oh, somehow or other, this little nation of Egypt and Syria, they've got a feeling, oh, we're going to go to Israel's aid. Didn't go to work. Let's read it. At the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen. Now interpret that in modern warfare. And with ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land. Yes, sir. He's on the move. And many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. And brothers and sisters, they were the ones that Israel just mopped up here shortly before we get to that. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Why? Because he's got a military force behind him. There's none like it. There's no way Syria and Egypt can cope with it. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Now, brothers and sisters, you and I don't have to worry about how that's all applied, because we're moving into here now. Amen. Tribulation's on. Somewhere the bride's done gone to glory. How many are following? But that man's on the warpath. And for that 42 months, that man is going to do with Jewish saints and with Gentile foolish saint people that's left here, wherever he has power to get at them. Because he's going to try to stamp out this whole framework of religion that has pertained and has originated and come from this people, the Jews. Because keep in mind, true Christianity, the roots came from Jews, not Gentiles. So now that his whole mentality's changed, he's got to destroy the whole fragments of everything. And there will be a bloodbath. But now watch. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all precious things of Egypt and the Libyans and so forth. Actually, if we look at it right, that takes you back to Revelation 13. In that day, there's to be a mark. You know, receiving a number and so forth. Actually, it's pointing future to a complete cashless society. Now, you know and I know, though it's a cashless society as to how society functions, yet all this monetary valuation has to be based somewhere on something other that's of a monetary value. Gold, silver, precious stones, and all of that. That don't mean you and I carry it, but it means the monetary system of exchange is definitely going to be based on that, and he has the whole authority as to how it's functioned. That's why you have to read this in the light of Revelation 13. So as we go on. Now then, and keep in mind, all the time this, then you keep also in mind, in Revelation 13, speaking of this end-time Antichrist, how it says, and he has a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies against the God of heaven and them that dwell in heaven. He's no longer a religious man. He is strictly, I have to say, a socialist dictator resting on the God of materialism and humanism. And God's going to allow him to set that way for that allotted time. Now watch. We keep moving through the last of the week. He's got complete control. He's going to have a bloodbath. Now people listen. When we look back to 1963, when God used a messenger to this Gentile Laodicean age, and we see the revelation of the fourth horse rider, which is riding now in this religious world. And I have to say, that fourth horse rider has done gathered up and sent his message. There they are on Trinity Broadcast. Now on Trinity Broadcast, they all got their ideas about the Antichrist and this and that. But let's go to Paul's reading in 2 Thessalonians. I want you to listen to it carefully. Because Paul spoke of the Antichrist, the singular, who's coming, world appearing, coming on the stage, is after the workings of Satan with all power, meaning satanic powers, and signs, Hail Marys, and all of that stuff, and lying wonders. Watch the next verse. And is a conjunction with all deceivableness of unrighteousness. Now let's turn to this bunch of Protestant preachers. And that connects with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. They are also destined to collaborate and play the same part with him. No, they're not the Antichrist, but they're his little agents. So I don't care whether it's Pat Robertson or Paul Crouch or who they are. They are agents. They're instruments of unrighteousness. They're destined to perish, and their message is causing you to look their way, but God's message is said, look the other way. And I'll have to say, the Pope don't have to make speeches, get Christendom together. He leaves it up to his cohorts. He's just dealing with the big shots in government. And that's why, brothers and sisters, then it follows up by Paul. And for this cause, God shall send them, plural, strong delusion. He's not talking yet about the laity. He's talking about men in the hierarchy. Because they're the ones that's going to spread the message down. That's to create all of this deception, and behind it is the man of sin, the Antichrist, the false prophet, the son of perdition, one destined to lead something to destruction. So, if he's destined to lead something to destruction, then you've got to see why when that spirit comes out of the bottomless pit, the end of it is perdition, annihilation, being destroyed. So getting it back here now, and we'll finish it up. Now then, he's made his conquest. He's established himself in the Holy Land. And he's cracking a whip. But it says there under the fourth horse rider, and power was given unto them to kill with sword, with famine, with beasts of the earth. Now listen, that is not a universal picture. Read it. Over 1/4 part of the earth. It means just what it says. People, Pat Roberts and them, they see this new world order, whoever the Antichrist is, the whole world, nations signing it. I don't care how many pacts, how many nations form some kind of a pact, the Trilateral Commission, all of this, that's only a monetary side of things. But I'll tell you one thing, if there is such a thing as a trilateral convention, which I agree is, the old Pope's going to be in control of it. It ain't going to be a bunch on Wall Street, nor out of the ancient cities of Austria, where it had its early bedrock. The old Pope of Rome is going to have it. Keep in mind, world leaders are not reading the Bible to formulate their future peace plan. They're looking and straining from the bottom of the barrel, human reasoning, trying to cook up something. But as they pull it up, it'll fall and flop and flounce around. And as we get closer to the time, God's going to see it that He'll raise up. Because the shaking of all things is to do this. Paul says in Hebrews, now this once more signifies the removing of those things that are shaken. So if the Trilateral Commission gets too big, too powerful, God will shake that too. If UN gets too big and tries to outrun the Pope, God will shake that too. Because this thing's going to come the Bible way, not Bush's nor Clinton's way. Especially Hillary. She's going to go God's way. That's why I say it's not a new world order. It's that old outfit coming up with a new suit of clothes on. The religious world today just ain't seen it in operation for so long, they forgot all about it. Because it was in history, but here we're looking at it as it mysteriously comes on. That's why you've got that 10 horn set up over there in Europe right now. There's the framework of it. So we got to continue on. Well, now we're getting closer to the end of the week. Now don't tell me, brothers and sisters, everything goes happy-go-lucky till the last day and then big old chaos. Don't picture it like that. It's not the way it works. Because in that part of the world, He has allowed to fulfill these prophecies related to Him. Keep in mind, Revelation 16, John saw the Euphrates River was dried up. That the way of the kings of the East. Now don't tell me the kings of the East has been playing ball with the Pope. They've just been sitting over there watching what he's doing in the West. It was just said the other day, now they know that China has tested another atomic device underground, which they weren't supposed to do. You see all the rustling going on in North Korea. One of these days, brothers and sisters, whether the world likes it or not, we are going to lose our military stability in the Far East. We ain't going to be there no more. We're going to be so bankrupt and poor, we'll probably have to scrap every ship to buy the next loaf of bread. Because God's going to remove it. Because them kings have got to be turned loose. Look, they're all rising in the Far East as industrial potential for the third world industrial complex. Europe is number one. We have been number one. Europe's taken over. She's got to be that way, coming back into the prophetic picture. And we're going to be caught in the middle. As that's the upcoming, it's apparent we are the downgoing. Europe's coming up for the last roll. Now then, just picture. The Pope's in the Holy Land. He's sitting in the temple. He's giving orders. There's been hundreds and thousands of people killed wherever he can get a hold of them. But time's growing short. As that time grows short, I have to say there begins to be some rumblings and shakings. Politicians in the East, economic conditions, they begin to see their hours approaching. They see in the Western world, Europe, a growing, restless society. As I try to graphically picture this to you, picture this. In the Middle East, somehow or other, weather conditions prevail, water shortage. It plainly tells you that the tongue of the Egyptian sea, the river of the Egyptian river, that's nothing but the Nile, shall become so dry that men can walk over the delta dry shod. Keep in mind, the past 10, 11, 12 years. Ethiopia, Nigeria, Kenya, Somalia. That's the plateau regions where the headwaters of the Nile that flow north. Then after you go south off of this plateau, you're going into the lowlands, Somalia, and therefore. And that goes right on down through Uganda, right on into the tip of South Africa. The continent is drying up. But with the dams in the Nile, naturally they can preserve a lot of water. But as time gets further along, brothers and sisters, now does the Euphrates have to be dried up? No, it's only a sign. Because the drying up of the river no longer stops modern military transportation. But it's only a sign. It used to be an ancient geographical barrier. They could only cross it at certain times of the year. But that has nothing to do. So it's a sign. And the man of sin, he don't know it, but his hour is drawing close. Then I see this also in Revelation, as that week is now reaching its terminating point. And John said, I saw out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, and out of the mouth of the dragon, went 3 unclean frogs. What are these? These are spirits, devils, going forth to the kings of the earth to gather them together to that great day of wrath of God Almighty. The fact that them frogs leaping out now shows God is setting forth situations now to bring that man of sin to his end. I see in Europe, let's go to the 17th chapter. Time's getting short. In Europe, there's an economical and a political unrest. They have given themselves to this beast power for its hour, and it has not accomplished one earthly thing they hoped for. The future's gone. And it plainly tells you in the 17th chapter, in the allotted time, it's the 10 horns that takes a look at that church and all of her wealth and her merchandise. Her investments stood to the ends of the earth. And they take her. They take her off of her back. And they strip her naked. It's societies in Europe deciding this old Catholic system is nothing but a hocus pocus. It's been the biggest deception. It's dreamed society of its wealth, of its ability to progress. Now then, let's turn to our scriptures. But tidings out of the east. That's a geographical direction. We're not looking at Saudi Arabia nor Syria. We're looking to the far east. Because the sign is there. It's time for Armageddon. I can see these kings of the east. They've got to come to battle Armageddon with a potential reasoning. You know why? Because they see this unrest in Europe. Oh, they're getting rid of that old system they have flirted with for so many centuries. I'm glad we run her missionaries off years ago. So they think they're catching Europe at a sleepy time. And brothers and sisters, the fact that these 10 horns now has disrupted and thrown the woman away does not alter the picture of this man of sin. Because he is no longer, brothers and sisters, at that religious Hail Mary praying Pope. He's a tyrant. He's bent on being the supreme ruler and holding on, using the God of force. But he don't realize now what he has been successful in and has progressed according to Daniel. Now God's going to bring it all to an end. Watch. The tidings of the east. The word tidings, interpreted, means rumors. Over the newspaper and the news media. Politicians, the East is getting restless. Rumors out of the East and out of the North. That don't mean Syria, that's looking to Europe. Time has come. God is tearing this thing to pieces. And he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And then you take that, brothers and sisters, right to Daniel 12. And you have to back up, brothers and sisters, with that, because it speaks there of the times and the dividing of time. And when he shall have accomplished the power to scatter the holy people, then all these things shall be. Well, while he's ruled and reigned and did this, he's done that. The religious, the spiritual Jew has fled somewheres, and the rest been killed where he could get his hands on them. And now the time has run out, and now he's making preparations. And that's why you've got to read the rest of this along with Revelations 19. Keep in mind, the Battle of Armageddon does not get rid of this man. He's still the leader of this whole European combined force. But let's read it on. He shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant. Now this actually, brothers and sisters, is how he has done it in the Middle East, but it only puts it right here in the closing out period. And he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Well, he had really already done it. He sat there 3.5 years. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now let's take this to Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, verse 8. Paul says, concerning this one to come, whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with them, let's go to it. I don't want to misreading it just right here. And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. We see it's going on right now. That they all might be damned, judged in the end, who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Now then, but we are bound to give thanks always to God for you, brethren, beloved of the Lord, because God hath from the beginning chosen you. But right back up here in verse 8. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. You read that right along with that last passage of verse right there. Keep in mind, brothers and sisters, Daniel was 500 and some years before Christ. He wrote his prophecy in the language and phrase structure of how they spoke it in their hour. When the New Testament period began, Paul is a Jew. And when he uses Thessalonians here and writes this, he's using that as a basis. So keep in mind, when it says, and yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. And then Paul says, who will be destroyed with the brightness of his coming, and so forth. Then take it right to Revelations 19, and watch. The Lord's coming. Heaven's open. The Lord is descending with his army. Amen. And I pray to God we're all sitting on white horses. What a display. It's going to be better than having somebody sit out there on your wing and saying, go on. But to think how foolish that character is going to be. Read it in Revelations 19. And he saw the beast and the false prophet. There he still is again, head of this whole rotten deal. That goes to show he's no longer the Hail Mary, rosary, chain, cross-carrying papa. He's a tyrant. What God has done, stripped him of that. But the devil has anointed him. So that's why you have to read it like that. But every passage of Scripture dovetails. And when we see it then in this final setting, and there he is, assembled to make war against him that sits on